Can we please talk about the fact that Disney tried to steal Día De Los Muertos from Mexicans?
No mames, güey.
Hello everyone, and welcome back to An Honest Critique. With Día De Los Muertos this past weekend, I couldn't think of a better time to discuss Disney's Coco, a film that is centered around the traditional Mexican holiday. As a proud Mexican-American woman myself, I can honestly say that Coco is my favorite Disney Pixar film. It is cinematically gorgeous, and it tells a beautiful story about a family whose culture has been underrepresented in Disney's films over the years. However, this is not a video about how much I love the movie. This is a video about how Disney has poorly mishandled Mexican culture in its past films, specifically Saludos, Amigos and the Three Caballeros, how it has attempted to commit cultural appropriation in its films Moana and Coco, and how that idea of robbery ultimately became the plot of the movie Coco. I know that's a lot to discuss. So, without further ado, let's get into this. Disney is no stranger to controversy when it comes to representing race and ethnicity in its films. In fact, Disney has been accused of cultural appropriation many times. For those of you that don't know, cultural appropriation is the use of a culture's symbols, artifacts, or rituals by members of another culture. For example, a Native American war bonnet is a feathered piece of headgear traditionally worn by respected leaders. When supermodel Karlie Kloss walked down the Victoria's Secret runway show wearing one in 2012, she faced severe backlash. Ernie Zaw, a spokesperson for the Navajo Nation, said, "Any mockery, whether it's Halloween or Victoria's Secret, they're spitting on us." Keep this definition and this idea of cultural robbery in mind as we take a look at Disney's films and their actions throughout the filmmaking process. In the 1940s, Disney released two films, Saludos, Amigos and the Three Caballeros, which were meant to foster goodwill between Latin American and U.S. audiences. However, cultural critics like Karen S. Goldman accused these films of cultural appropriation and producing stereotypes that represented Latin America as exotic, idealized, and sexualized. You can see this in scenes like Donald chasing around Latin American women on the beach, gun-toting Mexican characters like Panchito Pistoles shooting his guns after bursting out of a piñata, and culturally appropriative interactions between Disney's tourist characters like Donald and Goofy and the Latin natives, as they're called. One of the most controversial scenes in the animated film Saludos, Amigos is when animators try to equate the American cowboy to the Argentinian gaucho. Richard Shale writes, perhaps to ensure that no South American be offended by this humorous portrayal of the gaucho, Goofy is first seen as a Texas cowboy who is whisked across the Rio Grande to the Argentine Pampas. Unfortunately, this approach and the scene in general had the exact opposite effect, as Argentinian artist F. Molina Campos, who is famous for his gaucho drawings and was brought on by Disney as a consultant, was so unhappy with the Goofy segment that he asked that his name be removed from the film as consultant. In the film, Goofy is stripped of his American cowboy attire and dressed rather forcefully in traditional gaucho attire. His portrayal as a gaucho borders more on stereotypical than culturally accurate, especially as the narrator seems to simplify traditional gaucho lifestyle. Campos was most upset by the fact that he was brought to the studio as a consultant to ensure that the gaucho would be appropriately represented, but his suggestions were ignored and only a few of his animations were used in the film. As if to add insult to injury, John Rose, Disney's liaison to the Office of the Coordinator for Inter-American Affairs, in a private memo to the New York office remarked, "The frank truth of the matter is that we don't need the guy at all." And that blunt fact applies to all the other South American talent we had lined up. Goldman does not elaborate on this statement, but it brings up an interesting point about the role of the cultural consultant and their value to the film. The film was supposed to focus on cultural similarities and help the two nations get along. But by disregarding the animator with first-hand knowledge of the culture, Disney received critical backlash and accusations of cultural appropriation from film and cultural critics. While Rose's ethnocentric attitude cannot be attributed to the entire Disney film industry, it must be taken into consideration when evaluating Disney's relationship with its foreign cultural consultants. Perhaps even more culturally problematic was Donald Duck's role as a tourist in Saludos, Amigos. In one of the most culturally appropriative scenes of the film, Donald exchanges a young Incan boy's wool cap, poncho, and flauta for his own helmet and camera. Like Goofy's gaucho attire, Donald's taking of the Incan boy's clothing and wearing it as his own seems problematic, especially when he is clearly distinguished as the American tourist throughout the film. He dresses as the Incan boy and attempts to do everything he has seen him do, as if culture is simply a costume to wear and a game to play. The narrator even goes on to say, the visitor is never satisfied until he tries on the native costume, thereby clearly distinguishing the native as other and distancing the American tourist from the foreign individual. Building on this observation, what makes this scene and narration problematic is that it paints culture as something that can be reduced to a few items, such as a musical instrument and articles of clothing that any person can simply try on themselves. This scene resonates with a modern-day example because in 2016, Disney was accused of a similar culturally appropriative act when it released a Halloween costume based on the Polynesian character Maui from Disney's Moana. The Polynesian community was outraged when Disney released a costume which featured brown skin sleeves adorned with Polynesian tattoos. Some took to Twitter and wrote, "Dear Disney, our brown skin is not a costume. Get out of here with that crap. Sincerely, a furious, brown-skinned Pacific Islander." Dear Disney, this is a cultural appropriation and my culture is not a costume. Although it is not directly mentioned in these heated reactions, one of the biggest issues with the Maui costume featuring brown skin sleeves is the possibility of brown facing. Brown facing, like blackface, is the act of painting or darkening one's skin color in order to impersonate people with brown skin. This act clearly demonstrates a kind of cultural appropriation because it's an attempt to steal another ethnic group or culture's identity by impersonation. The little boy wearing the Maui costume in the Disney advertisement had brown skin, so this was not the case this time. However, the idea of children being able to buy and wear brown skin costumes is very problematic. Given Disney's track record of appropriating Latin American culture, there was an immense amount of pressure on filmmakers to accurately portray Mexican culture in Disney's 2017 film Coco, which celebrates Día De Los Muertos. Director Lee Unkrich was vocal about the anxiety he felt towards his film being labeled culturally appropriative because he grew up outside of Cleveland, is white, and has no firm connections to that country or its traditions. Unkrich's acknowledgement of his lack of cultural awareness led to a lot of decisions that made the film more culturally accurate, such as traveling to Mexico, specifically to the states of Oaxaca and Michoacan, to research the sacred tradition of honoring the dead by speaking with families, visiting cemeteries, and learning as much as they could over the 6 years of production, which is the longest amount of time spent on any Disney Pixar film. The record-breaking amount of time that filmmakers spent on researching and producing the film is significant because it suggests that Disney wanted to get it right by taking their time and genuinely understanding what Día de los Muertos meant to those that celebrate it. However, Disney faced one of its most controversial challenges in 2013 when it received major backlash from the Latino community for attempting to trademark the phrase Día de los Muertos for the film. The backlash that Disney received after this trademark attempt was undeniable, as people from all over the world voiced their opinions about how Disney was infringing on something that is so uniquely Mexican and Mexican American, and that it was a result of not having culturally sensitive people as advisors on the film. One of the loudest voices during the controversy was Mexican political cartoonist Lalo Alcaraz, who produced a political cartoon depicting a skeletal Mickey Mouse or Muerto Mouse with the caption, "It's coming to trademark your cultura." As a result of the criticism, Disney issued a written statement claiming that the trademark filing was intended to protect any potential title for the film and related activities, and that it would be dropping the application as they would be going with another title. The problem with this statement is that according to Business Insight's Art Mariquin, the company submitted a trademark application to the U.S. Patent and Trademark Office in hopes of securing the sole right to sell various foods, cosmetics, toys, clothes, jewelry, Christmas ornaments, even chewing gum, bearing the name of a day that Mexicans and Mexican Americans set aside to honor the memories of ancestors and loved ones who died. Therefore, Disney was not trying to trademark Día de los Muertos for the sole purpose of protecting the film's title, but instead they were trying to trademark the sacred holiday in order to protect its earnings on all the merchandise that it could sell if the film was a success. Although Disney withdrew its trademark application amidst the backlash, this controversy brings up the crucial question asked earlier, which is at the core of Disney's problematic, culturally appropriative history. Is culture something that can be owned and/or sold, and if so, who has the right to do so? To begin to answer this question, one must first understand the term trademark, which Kembrew McLeod's Owning Culture describes as a method which businesses use to identify their products or services in a marketplace to prevent consumer confusion and protect the means they've chosen to identify their products or services against use by competitors. To better understand why there was so much backlash from the Latino community, one must break down this definition and apply it to the Mexican holiday of Día De Los Muertos. The sacred tradition of honoring the dead by this definition would be reduced to a product or service which Disney could identify as its own and protect from its competitors. If Disney had been successful in its trademark attempt, it would essentially own the rights to the Mexican holiday, and any Mexican individual that wanted to use the phrase in writing would have to ask an American company for permission to use a term that can be traced back centuries to Aztec history. Additionally, this would mean that Disney could put Día de los Muertos on any of its merchandise, like t-shirts, food, or even gum, and punish any individual that tried to do the same, even if they were of Mexican descent. To put it in another perspective, examples of a few things that can be trademarked are products, phrases, and logos such as McDonald's Golden Arches and Kraft Real Cheese. To equate the Mexican holiday of Día de los Muertos, which honors the dead through a national celebration of remembrance, to something as trivial as the Golden Arches of a fast food restaurant speaks volumes to how critical the idea of owning culture is. The cost of registering countless trademarks can get very costly, especially to those with limited resources, and this makes the privatization of culture an activity that only large corporations like Disney can engage in. While most people would not have ever considered trademarking something as culturally significant as the Mexican holiday of Día de los Muertos, this attempt brings attention to the fact that huge corporations like Disney could have been successful in trademarking Mexican culture in its 2013 attempt. In order to prevent more cultural appropriation controversies, Disney Pixar broke one of its most sacred rules and brought in outside cultural consultants while the film was still in production. In fact, it was the first time on any Pixar movie that outsiders were allowed into the studio's creative process. And Disney brought on different members of the Latino community, including artists, writers, political figures, and media executives to ensure a variety of perspectives. There was a lot of skepticism among the cultural consultants because of Disney's track record with cultural representation. Political cartoonist Lalo Alcaraz was one of the most skeptical, as he was asked to join the team of consultants to make sure that the film was appropriate and culturally respectful, despite being one of Disney's harshest critics during the trademark attempt. In an interview with OC Weekly, Alcaraz said, "I wanted to know if they'd actually listen to what I'd have to say if brought on board. I'll say what the truth is." Alcaraz's concerns were valid considering the Argentinian artist F. Molina Campos' suggestions were not incorporated into the 1942 film Saludos, Amigos, and John Rose, Disney's liaison at the time, was exposed as saying that the cultural consultants were essentially useless. However, according to Alcaraz's testimony, Disney did take his suggestions very seriously, as they incorporated things like language code switching and the famous chancla scene after he suggested them. With the help of these cultural consultants, Coco became the highest-grossing film of all time in Mexico and won both the Golden Globe and the Academy Award for Best Animated Feature Film in 2018. With Disney's history of cultural appropriation and perpetuation of negative Latinx stereotypes, I was really worried that Coco was going to be another big cultural faux pas. However, after seeing what great contributions the cultural consultants made, I found myself enjoying every second of the movie and feeling genuinely represented while I did so. While I thought the movie was culturally sensitive, heartfelt, and super entertaining, I couldn't help but get caught up in the plot about a man getting rich and famous after stealing his partner's music and taking all the credit. It just sounded too eerily similar to Disney's history. So I decided to take an allegorical look at the movie, with De La Cruz representing Disney and Hector representing Mexican culture. When we are first introduced to Ernesto De La Cruz, Miguel calls him the greatest musician of all time and the most beloved singer in Mexican history. This narration is accompanied by images of De La Cruz statues, tours, a montage of his famous movies and musical performances, and ultimately ends with his abrupt death in 1942. In an allegorical sense, De La Cruz's multiple talents and far-reaching fame coincide with Disney's multiple corporations and international fame. Cultural critics Henry Giroux and Grace Pollock describe Disney as an icon of American culture, which echoes Miguel's original statement about De La Cruz, while Disney's ability to transform every child into a lifetime consumer of Disney products and ideas coincides with Miguel's obsession with De La Cruz, as he watches old video cassettes of his performances, mimics them on his guitar, and is surrounded by his memorabilia. This scene, if we consider the allegorical reading, demonstrates the theme of cultural appropriation because it is one of many where the audience sees De La Cruz profiting off the theft of Hector's music. This idea of De La Cruz stealing Hector's music, claiming it as his own, and profiting off the merchandise closely resembles Disney's attempt to trademark Día De Los Muertos in 2013. When the company tried to claim the phrase Día De Los Muertos, the name of a day that Mexicans and Mexican Americans set aside to honor the memories of ancestors and loved ones who have died, for things like various foods, cosmetics, toys, clothes, jewelry, even chewing gum. Disney, like De La Cruz, tried to steal something extremely personal, in this case a sacred holiday, from an entire country of people in order to maximize its ability to profit from it. The company, like De La Cruz, was met with a huge backlash from the Latino community, so it quickly dropped the application. De La Cruz, like Disney, was met with harsh criticism when his fans discovered he was a fraud and booed him off stage. As Miguel crosses over the bridge into the land of the dead, there is a clear distinction between his human form from the skeletal population. Hector puts black and white makeup on Miguel to make his face look like a skull and claims that he is dead as a doorknob. A closer look at this scene reveals an interesting point about cultural appropriation and the Mexican holiday of Día de los Muertos. With its growing popularity in the United States, Día de los Muertos has become an opportunity for people with no ties to Mexico or Latin America to dress up in traditional Mexican dress and paint their faces like skulls for Halloween. This presents a few problems as Americans view Día de los Muertos as synonymous with Halloween, which it's not. And it is a clear example of appropriating culture to participate in a tradition that one does not fully understand. In the scene from Coco, Miguel's face paint does not make him a skeleton, the same way that a non-Latinx person who paints their face to participate in Día de los Muertos does not automatically become Latinx. Miguel even attempts to walk like Hector by imitating his lanky movements and claiming that he is walking like a skeleton, blending in, to which Hector responds, "No, skeletons don't walk like that," and angrily tells him to stop. Think about Saludos, Amigos. Goofy and Donald are clearly tourists in those scenarios when they try on the native costume of the Argentine gaucho or the Incan boy. But wearing their clothes doesn't make them members of the culture. So then we go back to Coco. Miguel, like Americans who dress up for the occasion, is exhibiting a type of cultural appropriation because he believes that dressing and acting like a skeleton will allow him to pass as a skeleton. This sentiment also rings true in the previously mentioned Moana example, where Disney thought it would be okay to create a costume that allowed non-Polynesian children to dress up as a Polynesian character from the movie. Hector, like the Polynesian community, was angered by Miguel's attempt to imitate him, and rightfully so, because Miguel's nonchalant attitude towards how easy it is to be a skeleton coincides with the culturally appropriative act of Americans dressing up on Día de los Muertos. After all the party guests have left, Miguel and Ernesto De La Cruz are confronted by Hector, who accuses De La Cruz of stealing his music. When De La Cruz acknowledges the fact that Hector is being forgotten, Hector angrily responds, "And whose fault is that? Those were my songs you took, my songs that made you famous. If I'm being forgotten, it's because you never told anyone that I wrote them." In this moment, the characters fulfill their allegorical roles, as Hector is the outraged individual who feels that his culture has been appropriated, and De La Cruz is the Disney powerhouse that has risen to fame and profited by appropriating that culture. De La Cruz's unwillingness to acknowledge Hector's significance in the creation process mirrors Disney's liaison, John Rose, who suggested that Argentinian artist F. Molina Campos' cultural contributions, along with all the other South American talent, were basically useless, despite using his animations in the film. Ironically, they left Molina Campos' name in the film even though he specifically asked them to remove it. Miguel quickly defends De La Cruz by saying De La Cruz wrote all his own songs, to which De La Cruz adds, "I never meant to take credit. I only sang the songs because I wanted to keep a part of you alive." Again, De La Cruz, like Disney, tries to justify his appropriative actions by claiming that his decision to sing the songs was solely to keep Hector's memory alive, just like Disney claimed that it was trademarking Día De Los Muertos solely for the title. Both De La Cruz and Disney lied in their attempted robbery because they both profited greatly, or would have, from the things they stole. De La Cruz with Hector's music and Disney with its failed trademark of Día De Los Muertos. The flashback scene, which reveals that De La Cruz murdered Hector for his music, demonstrates an extreme act of robbery, and it closely resonates with the backlash that Disney has received from its history of cultural robbery. As he's being dragged out, Hector screams, "You took everything from me, you rat," as if accusing Disney's Mickey Mouse himself of cultural robbery. This line seems to encapsulate all the times that Disney has tried to take components from different cultures to make its films and merchandise. It resonates most with Disney's trademark attempt of Día de los Muertos, because the Latino community was very vocal about Disney trying to steal a sacred celebration that was wholeheartedly Mexican. Look at Alcaraz's political cartoon and tell me it doesn't look like a visual representation of Disney's Mickey Mouse coming to steal Mexican culture. After De La Cruz has Hector dragged out, he says to a very nervous Miguel, "My reputation is very important to me," to which Miguel tensely responds, "Everyone knows you're the good guy." This scene not only demonstrates De La Cruz's anxiety about having his musical robbery exposed, but it highlights the importance that both he and Disney in general place on maintaining their reputation, fame, and fortune. Giroux and Pollock write, "Put the Disney Corporation under scrutiny, and a contradiction quickly appears between the company's cutthroat commercial ethos and a Disney culture that presents itself as the paragon of virtue and childlike innocence." This statement captures Disney's two-sided personality when it comes to maintaining its reputation through cutthroat tactics, like De La Cruz, and emulating a virtuous image to maintain its fan base. This devilish personality is further represented by De La Cruz's decision to have Miguel dragged out, as he says, "Success doesn't come for free, Miguel. You have to be willing to do whatever it takes to seize your moment." These lines can also be read as Disney's history of doing whatever it takes to seize the cultural property it needed, like music, language, and imagery, for films like Saludos, Amigos, Moana, and even Coco, whose Día de los Muertos imagery and Mexican music brought in millions of dollars for the company. Ernesto De La Cruz's final scene demonstrates the extreme consequences of cultural appropriation, as his murder and robbery are exposed to a stadium full of fans. Unbeknownst to him, De La Cruz is being broadcast when Miguel says, "Hector's the real musician, you're just the guy who murdered him and stole his songs." De La Cruz's fans gasp in unison at this revelation as they uncover the dark side of their musical idol. De La Cruz admits to stealing Hector's music when he says, "I'm the one who's willing to do what it takes to seize my moment," and throws Miguel off the stage to his death. Again, the audience gasps in horror as they witness the lengths that De La Cruz is willing to go to in order to cover up his past of robbery and murder. While Miguel is ultimately saved, De La Cruz walks out to his adoring fans, only to be abandoned by his orchestra, pelted with trash, booed off stage, and dragged away to his second death. In an allegorical sense, Miguel and the stadium of fans can represent the individuals that have accused Disney of cultural appropriation. In fact, the audience members' violent reactions closely resemble the Latino community, lashing out at Disney's trademark attempt in 2013, or the Polynesian community angrily tweeting about the Maui costume in 2016. With cancel culture being the norm nowadays, this scene from the movie and these real-life examples of being called out for cultural appropriation seem even more connected. And so, De La Cruz is killed in the land of the dead, and forgotten in the land of the living, with Disney's overarching message being that stealing is wrong. So the real question is, why does any of this matter? Why did you just sit through this quick history lesson and allegorical reading? Maybe it's because we love to hold our heroes accountable, especially when they mess up. I love Disney, and I love Coco. But do I think it would have been a completely different movie if cultural consultants like Lalo Alcaraz weren't involved? Absolutely. Look at Saludos Amigos. The Disney team spent some time in Latin America trying to understand the culture and the people, just like Coco. Only they came back that time and made a film that got chewed out for making us look like aliens from another planet. Or worse, like sexualized stereotype versions of ourselves. Disney messed up in the past a lot. Hell, it messed up in 2016 with the trademark attempt, and it got roasted for it really bad. But it took all of that, the bad stereotype films from the 40s, the Maui costume, the big cultural faux pas, for it to finally bring the right people into the studio and get this movie right. Sure, it's still not perfect, but I can guarantee that it would not be nearly as good or culturally sensitive without people like Mexican-American playwright Octavio Solis, political cartoonist Lalo Alcaraz, and so many more working behind the scenes to make sure it was represented accurately. I'm actually really proud that Disney brought Lalo Alcaraz on because he was super vocal when they messed up. And we all know how tough it is to admit when we're wrong. So good for you, Disney. Looking at Saludos Amigos, The Three Caballeros, and Coco, I think Disney is definitely learning from its mistakes. Now we just have to wait and see if they take these lessons into consideration as they continue to make films about different cultures. Because if they don't, they know that all us adoring fans will be here to let them know they messed up. Thank you so much for watching if you made it to the end of this video. I put a lot of work into it, and because this is a brand new channel, I would really appreciate it if you could please like, comment, and subscribe. Also, please let me know what I can do to make these videos better. As an honest critic, I am always open to critiques because I really do want to grow this channel into something special. So I guess I will see you guys in the next one.